Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for attending the Author and Their Journey series program today, featuring author Daniel Acosta, presenting his book, Iron River. And you can see Daniel here in the photo on Zoom and the poster, the cover of his wonderful book. So it's just 5 o'clock, and so we'll wait a few minutes to see if other people are joining us today. It's very hot.
Yes.
And some people might have changed their mind, or maybe they're trying to be in a cool place.
Yes.
So I hope everyone gets a nice cool glass of water. But as we're starting, please, if you're attendee, please mute yourself. Put your questions in chat. Daniel will graciously answer the questions after the program. We are recording the program. It will be on YouTube, Pasadena Library, for you to watch after the program. It takes us about a week to get it on YouTube. And also there is live transcript that you need to set up on your own computer. So Authors and Their Journeys is a series that we've had for many years at Pasadena Public Library, and we invite authors to come and talk to us about writing their book, their journey, how they got started. So as you listen to Daniel talking, think of questions that you might want to ask him, and maybe you are a budding author and you might want to know how he got going, how he published his book, how he dealt with the publisher, how he came up with this beautiful cover for his book. Did he have an artist, or did he write it and design it himself? And how did he come up with the name of the book? So Iron River received many, many awards. 2018, it was Best Books from Kirkus Reviews, and that's a library publication. It was a starred review from School Library Journal and a starred review as well from Kirkus. In 2018, it received the Patterson Prize for Books for Young People, the Poetry Center at Passaic County Community College. It was the 2018 Best Historical Fiction at Bank Street College, New York City. In 2018, it received the Skipping Stones Honor Award from Skipping Stones magazine. And then it was Best Southwest Books of 2018 at the Tucson Pima Public Library. So it has received lots and lots of awards. We have the book in the Pasadena Public Library. Currently, it is checked out, but you can put a hold on it, and it will be reserved for you once it has been returned. You can also order a copy from Vroman's bookstore. So, Iron River. A river runs through young Manny Montaldo Jr.'s life, heart and imagination. Sometimes at night, it even shoots through his brain like a bullet. But this river isn't water, it's iron. The tracks and trains of the Southern Pacific Railroad that pass along his tight-knit neighborhood in the San Gabriel Valley, just 10 miles east of LA. That is the Iron River. So welcome, Daniel, to speak about your book, and we are delighted that you are here today with us.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you. I want to thank you, Christine and Tiffany, for hosting me here. And I'd like first to give God all the glory for this book. It was a labor of love that started way back when I was a young man, a teenager myself in high school. And my best friend and I, we were this book is kind of modeled after the three friends that I hung around with in our neighborhood in San Gabriel. So some people ask me, is this an autobiographical novel? And to a certain degree, yes, it is. Not everything that happens in the book happened to me, but some things did. And I shared them with my friends. And two of those friends have since passed away, and one friend still, as I do, still resides in Southern California. And so this book was a labor of love, and it's haunted me most of my adult life, trying to make sense of our childhood and our friendship. Our friendship, we shared that adolescence in the turbulent years of the late 50s, right before, on the cusp of the revolution of the 60s, right before that, and it was a time of the atomic bomb and the Cold War, and right after the war in Korea, and so I remember as a kid having atomic bomb drills in our school where it's silly to think about now. We would get under our desks like an earthquake drill, but if an atomic bomb had gone off in Los Angeles, that wooden desk would not have protected us very well. So, and the Friday alarms, the sirens that went off throughout the cities back in the 1950s, they were air raid drills. And I don't know, back in the 50s, I remember seeing Life magazine, people built atomic bomb bunkers in their backyards, kind of like the Midwesterners do for tornadoes. So anyway, that's kind of the milieu of the novel, 1958, the summer of 1958. And I say it haunted me because I had wanted to write this book for a long time. I was encouraged in high school by a teacher who said that he thought I could write, I had a gift for it. So that's all it took, one teacher. So all the teachers out there know that you can influence a child for a lifetime by encouragement. With his encouragement, I started taking writing seriously. I majored in English at Cal State LA. I went through we didn't have a creative writing program per se like Irvine does and Iowa State. It was just you took the classes, a couple of classes in writing, and I had the pleasure and the honor of attending class with Joseph Wambaugh, a couple of classes with him in creative writing. And way back in the early 70s, he would bring in samples of his writing to be critiqued by the class, and I absolutely had nothing negative to say. I mean, he was an incredible writer, so he deserves all the success he's had with his books and the TV and movies that have come after it. I was very impressed and very honored to be in that class. It was a very humbling experience to be in a class with really accomplished writers, and I was kind of a newbie myself. I had been drafted into the Army, and I did a lot of writing while I was in the Army, and nothing published, but just for my own development. And after the Army, during the Vietnam War, I was stationed in Germany. And after my service stint, I enrolled at Cal State LA for my teaching credential. And I was hired at Mark Keppel High School in Alhambra, and I taught there for 34 years. And I loved teaching English, and especially loved teaching literature and creative writing. So I learned by teaching, and so I think my writing has benefited greatly from teaching writing because you can't teach what you don't know. And so I had to learn, what's important, what's important about writing, what do I need to convey here. And I was writing myself, so I knew I was going through what the students are going through. Although when I was teaching English, I made the mistake, I tell people at book talks that I should have been a PE teacher, because English teachers have stacks and stacks of compositions and papers to read. And I don't know what PE teachers do when they go home, but I don't think they have stacks of papers to read. This is not a knock on PE teachers, but I was sort of envious of them. So I had to take a break from writing, a long break. It wasn't until I retired that this book, this ghost of this book came to me and said, okay, it's time, I've let you have a career teaching English, and it's time for you to write me. I think it was a Nobel laureate, Toni Morrison says, if there's a book in her Nobel speech, she said, if there's a book that you'd like to read but it hasn't been written, you must be the one to write it. And so that's although I didn't take her advice because I didn't know that advice. That's pretty much what happened to me. I had a story to tell, and I sat down, and it took me several years and many drafts to write this story, to understand the story, and to make it a cohesive story. Because you can't just take a bunch of memories and put them on paper and expect people to discover the story there. You have a responsibility as a writer to lead them in this journey of discovery of the novel. And so after 14 drafts, I submitted it to several publishers, and a couple were interested. Cinco Puntos Press, which is my publisher, was my publisher. They have since, the couple that owned the press, and it's a very prestigious small press it was based in El Paso, Texas. They retired from the business. Their children have other business interests, so they sold the business to Lee and Low Books in New York. And so now my publisher is a New York publisher, and along with that comes a lot of advantages for the writer. They're based in the publishing capital of the world, probably, New York City, and so I'm excited about the prospects for the book in their hands. So Iron River then is it's a book about four boys. The book is told from the point of view of the narrator, 12-year-old Manny Maldonado Jr. His father's Manuel Maldonado, and they live in a Mexican-American neighborhood in San Gabriel, California. Across the street from Manny's house is the railroad tracks, and the railroad tracks make up the Iron River. You asked me earlier where the title came from, and that's one of the first things that hit me when I started writing the book. I love the title, and I love the oxymoron. A reviewer said it's a delicious oxymoron. An iron river, solid and liquid at the same time, and that Iron River refers to the railroad tracks. And the novel is, to me, a kind of a paean or an homage or a homage to Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. I see Manny Maldonado as a Mexican-American Huck Finn with his buddies, and the railroad is their playground, the railroad tracks. Of course, they go to the park in summer and go swimming, and they find places to explore throughout the neighborhood. But they're pretty much homebodies. They're confined to their neighborhood because they have bikes, or wherever they go, they either ride bikes or go on foot. So their travels are very limited by the transportation. And in this neighborhood, Mexican neighborhood, in 1958 was predominantly Mexican American. San Gabriel was, I would say, it was kind of four different sections of the city. North San Gabriel were the upper middle class people who are on the verge of wealth, and they lived right next door or just below San Marino. And then there was the San Gabriel Village, which was a middle class neighborhood, a development, and there was redlining, so if you were a minority member, you probably wouldn't be able to buy a home there, affordable or not. And then the southern part of San Gabriel was a mixture of white, lower middle class, and Mexican Americans that blended. And then my neighborhood is predominantly Mexican American with some Japanese American residents and a couple of black families, African American families. Not many, maybe 2 or 3 families, and about maybe a dozen or more Japanese American. And so it was a very integrated neighborhood, but the rest of San Gabriel was definitely segregated. The one place in San Gabriel that all the kids could meet. I went to a Catholic grammar school, so I had friends who lived in the different other neighborhoods, and I wasn't allowed to go over to their house. They weren't allowed to come to my house, but we could meet at Smith Park in San Gabriel and go swimming, and that's where we would meet our other friends that we couldn't associate with outside of school. Smith Park was like the was like the salad bowl for the community, the whole city. It's our central park, and that was a great resource for everybody. That's where segregation didn't rear its ugly head. So if you had 25 cents, didn't matter color of your skin, just had to wear trunks or a bathing suit. Girls had to wear caps, and you got in. That was wonderful. Iron River is told by Manny, and he's looking back on this summer of 1958 from the point of view of maybe October of 1958. So he's looking back, and he's telling you, the reader, what happened and how that affected him and in his 12-year-old way. One of the challenges was to write a book from the point of view of a 12-year-old. If you ask a 12-year-old to tell you a story, they probably are not going to be able to tell a coherent, cohesive story with digressions that come back. And writing a novel is an art, and a 12-year-old boy doesn't have that artistic development yet, except for maybe some prodigies. And so my biggest challenge was, I want to write a book that makes sense. It was originally intended for me. I wrote it for the pleasure of writing it. And then when I looked at it, I thought, this is good. And I shared it with friends, and they said, this is good. And that's what prompted me to send it out to publishers. So originally it was kind of not so much a memoir, but a fictional coming to terms with being 12 years old, looking back. But I didn't want it to be like To Kill a Mockingbird, where the narrator is an adult looking back. I wanted it to be a kid. And if I'm successful, I have had you believing that this kid told this story from beginning to end. If you believe that a kid told this story, then I'm successful beyond my dreams, because that's quite a challenge. To make it sound like a kid, but to tell a story with the skills of an adult writer, hopefully polished enough for it to be a good read, as they say. So at this point, I'm going to read a little bit. I'd like to read the back blurb of Iron River, because this, I think, really captures the blurb that Christine read was from the publisher, the editor, my editor, and I really like this section that she picked for the back blurb. It's a quotation from the novel. And this is Manny. I have to cough, excuse me. This is Manny looking back at the summer. I felt like time was spinning backwards, taking me back to the day when we found the hobo. After my confession to Father Simon, I was good with God, but time and the Turk weren't going to let me slide with the law. I listened for a siren that would come to take me, not to jail, but to the shut-down train station. The Turk was going to make me say I killed the hobo, and he was going to keep asking me if I knew who killed Lawrence Collison. He would even beat me up like he beat up my Uncle Rudy until I told him. But when I told him, he would kill me too. I heard the horn of the Southern Pacific engine coming on an east current. It was probably passing the mission. That's the San Gabriel mission. In a minute, it would be rumbling past my house. I went back to the couch and pulled my blanket over me. I thought about what Rudy told me about drowning himself on the track so he could end the trouble. I wondered what it felt like to drown. I think I fell asleep just before the train came past and the house shook like a baby earthquake. So Manny has a train going by every night. You can see over my shoulder, that's a menacing image of that black locomotive. You asked me earlier about the cover, and I'm happy to say that the editor and the publishers picked the cover. They commissioned an artist to design the cover, and I couldn't think of a better cover for it. I'm a retired high school English teacher, and I thought there are a lot of YA titles out there that are kind of cutesy, and their covers are kind of cartoonish, and there are a lot of adolescent boys that wouldn't be caught dead carrying those books in their hands because they're a little too cute and immature or something for them. And this cover and the title Iron River, to me, would be a book that a 14-year-old boy would be proud to carry around. It's a powerful image, the locomotive with these colorful, imaginative steam coming out, or smoke coming out the top of the chimney. And I could imagine a freshman in high school saying, yeah, I'm reading Iron River. And Iron River is a strong title. Nothing cute about it, and there's nothing cute about the story. One review in Goodreads said that it's a good story, but it's serious. It's really serious. Apparently, this person was looking for a light read, and she ran across Iron River, and it is not a light read in the sense that the subjects of this book are serious. Racism, police brutality, the disregard of human life in general by society if they're not productive. The hobos are kind of the equivalent today of homeless people, and our society struggles with what to do about the homeless crisis. And back in 1958, we had, and I mention it in the book, when the train would stop, hobos would come to my grandma's house and ask for food or a cup of coffee or something, and she would feed them. And a lot of people I know who lived along the railroad tracks, and people who have emailed me after they've read the book said, my grandma used to do that too, or my mom used to feed the hobos when they would come to the door, and they would put marks on the curb indicating that this was a safe house, or another code would say beware of dog, or police, or the railroad bulls, the detectives that kicked hobos off the train are here, or something like that. So it was very interesting to do research on the Southern Pacific Railroad, and on the trains and on the various railroad lines that the Southern Pacific would connect to. So you'd see a train go by, and there would be boxcars from Lackawanna and from the Great Northern and different railroad lines going by. So it was kind of a fast-moving mosaic of colors, beautiful and deadly. We used to play on the tracks, and there was a fascination with the danger of the train, and there's a scene where Manny and his best friend Danny dare each other who can crawl closest to the railroad tracks when the train is going by. It's not something I recommend for anybody to do, for kids to do. Don't try this at home. That's the disclaimer. And so let's go back to the plot of the book. There's 3 points that the book revolves around, the story revolves around. And the first one, and I'm going to read a little bit about it to you, is the boys are bored on a summer day. They've been kicked out of the house by their mom or their grandma, and that was typical. In the morning you had breakfast, and your mom or grandma would kick you out of the house because she had housework to do, and you'd be in the way or making a mess or something. So we get kicked out of the house until lunchtime, or maybe until dinner. Don't show up until dinner time. Don't go far. Stay out of trouble. And don't worry, because if you get in trouble, somebody will call us up and tell us that you've gotten in trouble, because everybody knew all the kids in the neighborhood. So if a kid got in trouble, grandma would get a phone call. My mom would get home from work and spank me, and then my dad would get home from work and spank me. So talk about community, what is that? Neighborhood watch. We had that way before it became a government program, a neighborhood gossip watch. So let's go back to the story. The boys are bored, so they go out they decide they're going to throw fruit at the hobos. One of the boys, his name is Marcos Rivas, lives so close to the tracks that he could almost reach out and touch them. There's just the right-of-way, the section between the tracks. It's an open section. And then his house is right up against the fence. So the windows rattle and the whole house is about to come down every time a train goes by. So the boys go to Marcos's backyard, and his mother has orange and lemon trees. So one of them gets a bright idea, let's throw fruit at the hobos. So the hobos ride on top of the box cars. We don't have box cars anymore. Now we have those modules, storage containers, shipping containers. Back then it was box cars. So they throw fruit at the box cars, and then they realize after the train has gone by that there's all this fruit. The fruit trees are naked of their fruit now, and there's all this fruit scattered around the tracks, and they're going to get in trouble. So they get a wagon and they go and start loading the fruit into the wagon to hide the evidence. And as they're pulling a wagon toward a drainage pipe near the railroad tracks, they discover a body, and they're stunned by it. And so they look at it, and they suspect that it's a hobo that has fallen or been pushed or something off, or maybe a piece of fruit, one of the lemons hit him, or an orange hit him, and he knocked him off balance and he fell off. Anyway, they feel like they're responsible for this. They don't know what to do. So that's one pivot point in the novel. The novel orbits around that event and the boys waiting to be arrested for the murder of a hobo. The second pivot point is Manny lives with his mom, dad, grandma, and his little sister Dorothy in a house, a 3-bedroom house. He shares a bedroom with his cousin Cruz, who's a bully. He's a teenager, and he picks on Manny all the time. And they have to share a bed. And one day, Manny's in the living room watching cartoons. He manages to talk his grandma into letting him stay inside because it's hot outside. And there's a whistle, a pachuco whistle. Back in the 40s, 50s, and 50s, there were pachucos, and they had a distinct whistle and a call to each other. And he goes out to investigate, and this pachuco's out there, and he says, "Where's your Uncle Rudy? I want to talk to him." Well, Uncle Rudy's in prison. He's in Folsom Prison for drug use. And so Manny doesn't want to say that he's in prison. He just says, "Well, he's not here." And the pachuco says, "Well, when he gets here, tell him that such and such person asked for him." And then he walks away, and Manny thinks that's weird. My uncle's been in prison a lot of years, and why would... Well, a couple weeks later, the family gets a letter saying that Uncle Rudy is coming home on parole. And apparently, the people in prison have communicated to their buddies out of prison, and the prison communication system is much more efficient than the postal service, because the street was ready for Rudy when he came home. The family, so the street characters learned about Rudy's parole 2 weeks before the family did, which is kind of creepy if you think about it. And the drug dealers were already lined up to get Rudy back on drugs. He got clean in prison, and he's coming home, and he's going to try to find a place to live. In the meantime, Manny's going to have to give up his bedroom. His cousin is going to have to go back home to his parents, and Uncle Rudy's going to get Manny's bedroom. Problem is that Manny's father, Manuel, is angry. He doesn't want his brother home. His brother has been nothing but trouble ever since they moved to California from Arizona, and he doesn't want anything to do with his brother. He's had it. His brother has had chance after chance after chance. He's humiliated the family. He's the shame of the family and the neighborhood. And he's afraid that he's going to have a bad influence on his son. That's the second pivot point in the novel that's developed. And the third one is one of the black African-American families, a teenager named Lawrence Collison is a drug addict himself, and he's found murdered in an abandoned San Gabriel train station. And all of these three events are tied together, and I don't want to go into how they're tied together, but Manny has to navigate these shoals. What are we gonna do about the dead hobo? Somebody asked me, this reminds me of Stand By Me, that movie Stand By Me, where the three boys discover a body. But I don't know when Stephen King devised that story or came up with it, but my story, I know that book and the subsequent movie came out long after I had already started thinking of, not that anybody stole any ideas from it, because it's very different His story is very different than mine, and I think his is actually a short story. Mine is a novel. But these three events, the death of the hobo, the return of the prodigal son, so to speak, and the death of Lawrence Collison, have a common string to them, and I really don't want to give that away. I'd like to, if you don't mind, I'd like to read a little bit from the book. I'd like to read the very opening. This is Manny is narrating the book. November 1958. I'm telling you this now because I don't know when I'm going to die. If you ask me why is a 12-year-old kid thinking about dying, well, I don't want to die. You hear people say they wish the old people had wrote down things because now they're dead and their stories didn't get told. But sometimes people die who aren't old, and that got me thinking. People don't always die when they think they're going to. So I want to tell you this story in case I die before I get old. So you ask yourself, why is a 12-year-old boy thinking about death? Well, by the end of the book, I think I think I came up with 14 people die in the book. Now, I said at one authors gathering that I don't like stories that use death for entertainment. I couldn't stand Murder, She Wrote. The idea that a TV series would be based on how different people are murdered. To me, human life has dignity, and I don't think it's right to play around. I do read murder mysteries, but I'm not crazy about them. I'm looking for technique, writer's technique. I don't like the idea of death as entertainment. I think that's not healthy for our society. And I think that death should be looked at with dignity. Everyone has inherent dignity as a human being. And so it was with great seriousness that I wrote about the 14 deaths that Manny is aware of that are mentioned in the book. 14 people die different ways. And so death for Manny is a mystery. It's one of many mysteries that he's faced with, and he has to deal with these mysteries. Some of them are solvable, others remain mysteries. And toward the end, he discovers some new aspect of the mystery of death that he didn't know about before the events of the story unfold and transpire. So I'm going to read another part to you. This is where you meet his friends and the scene where they think they've killed a hobo. You already know I've already introduced best friend Danny, who lives 2 houses down, and his beautiful sister. She's everybody wants to be her boyfriend because Sonia is a beautiful butterscotch brown skinned girl with beautiful eyes, and all the guys want to be her boyfriend, but she's so beautiful that she intimidates all the boys in the neighborhood with her beauty. But Manny, he's a kid, and when he goes up to say hi to Danny, what are we going to do today? Sonia's usually on the front porch. She's taken a bath, and she's out in the cool shade, and when Manny comes up the steps, she's got to give him a big hug and a kiss. And it's kind of a funny scene, I think. I like that scene. So Danny is Sonia's little brother. He's the same age as Manny. You already know my friend Danny. Well, besides him, my other best friends are Marco and Little. Marco's whole name is Marco Antonio Julio Cesar Rivas. He says his mom gave him that name because she thought it was in the Bible somewhere. Sister Margaret Mercy, who Marco calls Margaret Murphy, told him his name isn't in the Bible, but it comes from Roman history. Marcos is the youngest kid in our gang. I'm almost a year older than him. He's about the smartest kid I know. He gets straight A's in school, and he loves to read. He has bookshelves stuffed with books in his front room. Other neighborhood kids tease him and tell him, who does he think he is, white? I hate that about Sangra. Sangra is the colloquial name for the neighborhood. In Spanish, a lot of people pronounce the name San Gabriel, but the locals found out it was easier to pronounce it San Gabriel, and so San Gabriel came out to be Sangra, shortened to Sangra. Kind of like San Fernando is called San Fer, or San Bernardino is called San Berdu. Our neighborhood called themselves Sangra. Later on in the 60s and 70s and so on, it became the nickname for the local gang, and that gave it a negative connotation. But originally, it was a very, very innocent nickname for the neighborhood. I hate that about Sangra. Whenever a person does something good or gets an award for something, they always say, "Who does he think he is?" or "He thinks he's all good." I hate it the most when they say, "Who does he think he is? White?" I think that's part of why my Uncle Rudy went back to prison. Anyway, Marcos lives at the corner of Main and California, where the street makes an L right next to the railroad tracks. His bed is barely 2 feet from the rails. He says when the train goes by at night, his house shakes and his bed bucks like a rodeo bronco. The windows rattle so much that his mom stuffs rags tight around them so they won't break like all the windows in Main Street do. Marcos says his mom tells his dad she's going to divorce him if they don't move. Little's my last best friend. His real name is Carlos Gutierrez. I'll tell you about why we call him Little later, because I need to tell you what happened that made me think I might die before I get old. School was out for the summer, but it was a cool day because clouds were blocking the sun. Me and Danny and Little went over Marcos's house to see what we could do. Marcos was sitting on his front steps when we got there. Nobody said anything until Little spoke up. "Want to go to the wash?" Rubio Wash is a storm channel the other side of San Gabriel Boulevard. Cruz told me it starts at the San Gabriel Mountains in Pasadena. It comes south past our neighborhood, then flows into the San Gabriel River at the Whittier Narrows. I say flows as a joke because there's usually just a little bit of water in it, which makes it easy to jump over. There are all kinds of things to find down there in the wash. Old tires and shopping carts from the Safeway, and wooden boards and broken toys and sometimes dead animals. We have to crawl through a long drainage pipe to get to the wash. "Nah," Danny said. "I don't want to get dirty." "How about the Hobo Park?" I said. The Hobo Park is a clump of bushes and weeds up the tracks where hobos sometimes camp. We're not allowed to go there. If somebody from Sangra saw us there, they'd call up our mom or grandma and tell them we're up to no good. The neighborhood is like that. You can't do anything without people knowing who you are and who your family is and what you're up to. Smith Park's the real city park. The pool opens the second week of summer, but it's usually too crowded until after 4th of July. Plus, the teenage guys hog all the games in the rec room anyway. I'm not ever allowed to go to Smith Park by myself at night. At night, Smith Park is a dangerous place. That's where the Tecatos hang out. Tecatos is what we call heroin addicts. Cruz calls them T-cats. I know about T-cats because my Uncle Rudy was one. Betty is his aunt. Betty doesn't like me to use that word to describe him. We didn't plan what happened. One minute we heard the horn of the 940 freight train coming out of LA on an east current. And the next minute we were in Marcos's backyard throwing oranges and lemons at the hobos riding on top of the boxcars. It was a light current, and before I knew it, the caboose went by and the tracks were quiet again. We looked at each other kind of in shock because we never did that before, throw fruit at hobos. "We better pick up the fruit before my mom comes out," Marco said. "If she finds out we did that, she's going to whip me. And then she's going to tell my dad when he gets home, and he's going to whip me too." When we got to the tracks, the ballast shoulder was covered with smashed oranges and lemons. Wherever I looked was orange and yellow and green. Marco said, "What are we going to do with all this stuff? We can't put it back on the trees." "I have an idea," Little says. "Let's take it to the pipe and dump it down the wash." "There's too many to carry," I said. Finally, Danny said, "I'll go get my wagon and we can load it up. It's big enough to hold all the fruit." It took about 10 minutes to get the smashed fruit into the wagon and drag it to the right-of-way. Me and Little pushed, and Danny and Marco pulled the radio flyer. That's when we saw what looked like a bundle of clothes. It was Little who first realized it was a body. We walked real slow to get close. It was a man, a hobo. He was face down on the right-of-way. Little pointed at one of the hobo's arms twisted behind his back in a way people can't put their arms. His right leg was in a wrong way under him, and his foot was missing its shoe. His arms broke nearly off, Little said. Danny's eyes were filling with tears. What are we going to do? I asked. Little said, we killed him. Marco turned to Little. One of us did. Who hit him? I tried to remember every fruit I threw. Little was serious. If we don't know who did it, they'll put all of us in prison. Do they send little kids to prison? Marco asked Little. Tears were rolling down his cheeks. Juvie, said Little, at least till we turn 18. We stared at the body. I bit my thumbnail. It tasted like lemon. Maybe we can take him to the wash. It got real quiet. Even the cars stopped crossing the tracks. A crow on the telephone wires squawked over us and we jumped. We all looked at the wagon loaded with smashed fruit. We would have to dump it to load in the smashed man. We need to call the cops, Marco said real quiet. He was right. I'll be back. Wait for me and don't touch him. I told Little and Danny, I didn't really mean I wanted to dump him in the wash. I knew you wouldn't do that when it came down to it, Little said. I looked down at the dead man again. He was wearing farmer's overalls and a jacket that goes to a suit. The hand of his broken arm was the color of ashes. His hair was brown and gray in places, and greasy looking. The foot that had a shoe was wearing a worn-out old boot. Ay, Dios mío, what did you boys do now? I turned and saw Marco walking toward us with his mom at his side. She was wearing a flowery yellow apron that didn't go with her dark green dress, and she was wiping her hands on the bottom of the apron. Her face was all pulled together. When we got out of the way and she saw the hobo's body, she stopped cold like she walked into a wall. She covered her mouth with her hands. She looked at the wagon and the smashed fruit. None of us answered. I called the police and they will be here soon. Did you touch it? No, Danny answered. His tear tracks were clean streaks down his dusty face. I expected to hear a bunch of sirens, but only one police car drove up this right-of-way from San Gabriel Boulevard. It started coming toward us. The car stopped in back of the hobo's body, and a cloud of dust blew over him. After a long time, the driver's door opened, and a policeman climbed out, slow. My heart sank to my stomach. His last name is Turkness, but Sangra calls him Turco, the Turk. We know he had it in it for Mexicans, so steer clear of him. He did whatever he wanted to whoever he wanted and got away with it. The Turk stood with his hands on his gun belt and looked down at the hobo, then over at us. He was squinting in the dusty light. He went to his car and came back wearing his hat and sunglasses. He looked even scarier with the glasses on. He turned his head without moving his neck like owls do. I knew he was looking at the wagon full of smashed fruit. He walked over to the body and squatted down. He lifted the hobo's shoulder, tipping the body so he could see underneath. He let it drop back down. Without standing up or looking at us, he said, "What happened here?" We stood quiet. I said, "What happened here?" The Turk's voice was deeper than my dad's and echoed inside itself. "We were throwing fruits at the train," Little answered. "That's against the law. You boys should know that." We knew. The Turk got up and stood staring at us for a long time. I wanted him to hurry, so whatever punishment was coming would come fast and we could get it over with. He turned and walked back to his car and pulled out the radio handset. He looked at us when he talked into the radio. There was loud static, and a voice over the radio said something. The Turk hung up and came back to us holding a sheet of paper. "Are you their mother?" he asked Mrs. Rivas. She pulled Marco so his back was against her, and she put her arms over his chest. "Only this one is mine." The Turk turned to me. "You speak English?" "Yes, sir." He turned his head to Little. "You?" "Yes, officer." "All you boys read and write English?" We nodded without saying anything. He handed the paper to Mrs. Rivas. "Where do you live?" Mrs. Rivas pointed to her house. We turned to see her backyard. Her fruit trees were naked. "Take the boys to your house and have them fill out that sheet Names and addresses. He pointed at the paper. When the meat wagon gets here, I'll come for it. Mrs. Rivas steered Marco toward their house. Danny and Little and me followed. So that's the beginning of troubles in Sangra for Danny and his three friends. They're going to, throughout the book, they're going to wonder when the police are going to come to their house and arrest them for the murder. The next and last piece I'd like to read to you is the arrival of Uncle Rudy on parole from prison. The boys have been playing up in the clubhouse, they call it. It's Grandma owns a little back house that she rents to a couple from Mexico, and there's a big canopy of an avocado tree that shades the roof of this little rental house. And the boys climb up the fence to the tree, and then they jump onto the roof. They have a shipping pallet they found at the tracks and some cardboard from an old refrigerator box. So they have a place to sit up there in the coolness of the shade on hot summer days, and that's their club. So the boys have been up in the club, and they talking about what happened to the hobo and what's going to happen to them. And they split up and all go their separate ways. And time, Manny goes into the house, into his grandma's house. When I got to my house, I went around to the side porch and into the kitchen. Something was different. Grandma had the radio on to a Mexican station. She was cooking at the stove and singing real happy along with the radio. Then I saw a man sitting in a kitchen chair with his back to me. When the kitchen screen door slammed behind me, he turned around. He looked like my dad, but smaller and skinnier and more worn out. He had a bad haircut and tattoos on his neck and on his arm that he curled around the back of the chair. Grandma turned to me about the same time. Come say hello to your Uncle Rudy, she said. He just got home. I wiped my hands on my pants and held it out for my Uncle Rudy to shake. Manuel Maldonado a sus órdenes, I said. He smiled. His eyes were blue like mine, and he was missing a front tooth like my little sister Dorothy, but the rest of his teeth were real white. When he shook my hand, I saw a Pachuco cross tattooed in that spot where his pointer finger and thumb meet. "¿Qué hubo, little man?" His voice was higher than my dad's and sounded weak, like he was sick or something. He said Lido, like that tea-cat Marcel, Lino. Then I remembered I was supposed to tell Rudy that Lino came by looking for him, but something told me not to right then. I stared at my dad-looking uncle until Grandma said, "Wash up and come and eat with us." I looked at the stove. Grandma had made caldillo, Dad's favorite. When I got out of the bathroom, Rudy was already scooping up pieces of stew with part of a tortilla. Next to the plate was a cup of hobo coffee. Grandma saw me look at the cup. "You can't have alcohol, parole board rules." When she said parole board, Rudy's shoulders slumped a little. I sat down next to him. Grandma served me a small plate of stew. "I don't want you to spoil your appetite for supper, so just have one tortilla." We ate without talking for a few minutes. Maybe Rudy was trying to think of something to say to me. The quiet didn't feel good. "I'm going into 7th grade in September," I said. "That's real nice." High, sick voice. "You any good in school?" "I do okay. Not as good as Marco. That kid's really smart. He always gets way better report cards than me." "Your dad was pretty good in school. You look a lot like him when he was your age." He kind of barked out his words like he was mad, but he couldn't already be mad at me. Maybe that's how people talk in prison. I didn't ask. I wanted to tell him that he looked like Dad too, but I didn't. "Grandma says you're going to live with us," I told him. "You get to have my room. I'm going to sleep on the couch." By now, Grandma had joined us at the table with her caldillo and coffee. "Just until he finds his own place, right, mijo?" she said. Rudy looked around the kitchen. "So, has Sangra changed much?" "I don't think so," Grandma said, "but you'll know better when you get out and about." I liked the way that sounded, out and about. I need to remember that, out and about. Odds and ends. Rudy put one more piece of tortilla in his mouth. His dish was clean. He must have been hungry. He caught me looking at his plate. Home cooking, nothing like it. He made that clicking sound with his mouth, people do when they like what they ate. When I looked at him, he winked at me. He shook a toothpick out of the little jar on the table and put it behind his ear. Then he pushed his chair back and stood up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to get some shut-eye. He said that like they do in the cowboy movies. I wondered if you got to see TV in prison. I wondered what prison was like, but I didn't ask. Rudy moved slow when he went over and kissed Grandma on top of her head. I looked at her face. She was smiling, but worry was standing right behind her smile. Me and Grandma watched him walk to my old room. He looked shorter than Dad, but he was bent over so I couldn't be sure. And he walked kind of sideways, like those dogs you see walking down the street that got hit by a car but lived. You can't see any cuts or blood, but you know their insides are messed up and they walk like Rudy. Prison has worn him down, so be nice to him, Grandma said, and patted my hand. Well, I'd like to hear any questions, or at this time, I think I'd like, if anybody has any questions about my writing or the book or publishing or anything, I'd be happy to answer them now. How does that sound?
It sounds wonderful, and it was a wonderful program, and you're sharing your book with us. A wonderful book, very, very personal, very much kind of really a memoir, and people want to know, will there be a part 2 to this book?
Eventually. The book I'm working on right now is years and centuries and miles away from my little neighborhood. It's a totally different book, and the reason I'm writing it is because I'm interested in the story. I got to find out what happens. But it's it's nothing like this book. It's a totally different, out there, someplace else. It's not science fiction. It's historical fiction, but another time and another place.
So was Manny inspired by a real person?
Yeah, me. And my friends, my three friends.
Your three friends.
Yeah, and we were boon companions when we were adolescents, and we all went our separate ways as we went to high school. And then after high school, we went our separate ways. I have to tell you that I kind of switched names because Manuel was my best friend, and of course I was Danny. So it's really easy. I just switched the names, and he lived a couple of houses down from me. And one of the greatest things that resulted from this publication of this book is that he had told me when we were kids, you got to write about us. I don't know why he said that, but one day we were up in the club and we were, I guess, feeling happy and content. You know, we weren't adults yet. We were adolescents. We weren't teenagers yet. And life was pretty simple. And he says, you got to write about us someday. And I didn't remember that. He did. And he passed away in 2017 of cancer. And actually, the book was published in 2017, but it didn't come out. Well, it was published in 2018, but we already had ARCs, advanced reader copies. And so I read the book to Manuel, my friend, and family members, and he told me when he was in the hospital in one of his last days, you did it. You kept your promise and you wrote about us. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget it. It was an incredible moment, and that is reason enough for having written the book, that I kept the promise to my best friend, and he loved it. It's funny because at the reading, we had the reading of the book over several nights in my backyard, and he started out kind of in the background, far off over there. By the end of the book, he was sitting right next to me, looking over my shoulder as I was reading to the group, and it was one of the most beautiful summer experiences. One of the most beautiful experiences of my life is sharing that with him, not knowing that he would soon pass from his cancer, that he had cancer, and then passed. So it's got great meaning for me.
Oh, very, very special.
Yes.
Very, very special. Really, really touches us all to hear that. Very, very special. So there were 4 of you. Now, did the other 2 get to read it too, or were they there that night that you were reading it?
One of them, his name is Johnny Quiros, passed away a couple of decades ago. He died too young, but he had medical issues. He had bad heart and other things, diabetes and things. And the fourth is a Vietnam veteran, and I see him occasionally. I ran into him while I was working on an early draft of the book. I ran into him at Home Depot in El Monte, and wow, we were so surprised. I hadn't seen him in ages, since high school, I would say, And so I could hardly wait to tell him. And he says, well, let me know when when people say, I'm writing a book, or I'm going to write a book. Well, I wish I had $1 for everybody who told me, I'm going to write a book. So I told him, I'm going to write a book about us. And he says, he laughs, and I laughed. And he says, well, let me know when it's done, okay? And I did, and he was shocked. And so he came to the reading too, and he hadn't seen Manuel in years, and so it was a nice reunion of 3 of the 4 Musketeers, and we've been in touch since, and it's been great. What's wonderful is people have bought the book in my neighborhood, and I've encouraged them to share it with their children, because a lot of people my age in our neighborhood had similar experiences, and they told me, this book is about me. One of my friends says, this book is about me. How do you know so much about me? And what can you say? Thank you. Share it with your kids. Tell your kids to read it, and then talk about your upbringing, your childhood, your adolescence, because I just wish when I was a little kid, and the old folks would sit at parties and reminisce and talk about the good old days, I wish I had paid attention and listened to them, because history gets lost. Personal history is so fragile, and it's so easily, it's evanescent. It vanishes like the dew in the morning. It just dries up, and people wonder, well, who's related to who, and where did they come from? And the old timers knew, but we weren't. Who cares about what the old timers talk about? It's all about us, and what we're interested in, whether it's on Twitter or TikTok, or I asked my grandkids, how did you like the book? Well, I started it. That always cracks me up. But you haven't finished your grandpa's book? Well, I'm going to this summer. So I don't know if that answered any question, but.
Well, it was a wonderful presentation. You have a wonderful way with telling your story. And I think being an English teacher, you have a knowledge of all of these different books. And you must have been a great English teacher.
Well, I hope so.
You see some of your students still?
Oh yeah, we're in touch on Facebook, and I keep track of them, and they're all grown-ups, and some of them are grandparents now. And I remember when they were just funny, dorky teenage and freshmen in high school, and high school kids, and had crushes and falling in love every 5 minutes, and now they're all grown up, and they're real adults, and I like to send them happy birthday, kid. And they're in their 50s now. Happy birthday, kid. They'll still be kids to me. I love them. I love teaching. I love teaching at Mark Keppel High School. I love those kids. They were great kids. The gangbangers and the straight A students, and the people in the band, and the thespians, and the athletes. They were all really respectful of me as a teacher, and I cherish that. I really do.
Well, thank you very, very much for spending your afternoon with us and telling
My pleasure. My honor and my pleasure.
About your book. It was an honor to us at the library. Remember, we have a copy of Iron River in the Pasadena Public Library. It's checked out, but you can put a hold on it. And also you can get your very own copy at Vroman's Bookstore. So thank you so much.
Also, I'd like to add that if you go to my website, I have a few copies that,
good.
and I have a PayPal account. So if you'd like an autograph copy, just go to my ironrivernovel.com, ironrivernovel.com, and then you'll see a place there that if you want to buy a book, and PayPal sends me your email, and then I ask you how you want it to be engraved, or not engraved, but signed, autographed. Who do you want it dedicated to? And then I just mail it off to you, and you get it in a couple of days.
Oh, that's very, very nice for everyone to know. That makes it
I just have a few copies left.
very, very personal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very, very personal. So thank you very, very much. We'll look forward to your sharing your next book with us. That's on a very different.
Very different. I look forward to it.
Yes.
Thank
So
you very much.
Thank you so much.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're honored too. Good night, everyone. Thank you for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye.